I hope you guys enjoy this word vomit sampling of what medieval Indian fashion was. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into this video and thank you for showing an interest in Indian fashion history. I'm really glad that y'all want to learn more about it. Super big thanks before I get started to my lovely friend Gigi of Belladonna History and Costuming and Color for having the idea and hosting the Routes Symposium event, which is what this panel of one, I suppose, is part of. Also, thank you to Red Threaded and Bernadette Banner for sponsoring all of the different teachers for this event. If you guys are interested in learning more about the culture and clothing from the countries that lay along the Silk routes, definitely tune in to the other videos from this event. They will be linked in the comments so you can check it all out. That being said, let's dive into it. The initial intention of this video actually had been to end with a book cosplay, and I realized as I was going through all the information that I wanted to include in here that there's just so much. There's so much, and like I wasn't able to really do justice to a costume when I was so focused on the research. So, you know what, maybe we'll have a follow-up part 2 of me actually putting together this outfit, because I still do want to do that. But for now, I present to you the overwhelming amount of research that I found and that I ended up deep diving into on this crazy rabbit hole of what Indian fashion was like in the medieval and ancient times. So quickly, before we get started on all of this, like what time period are we talking about exactly? I have been saving medieval because that is what Eastern audience, wow, no, that's the wrong one. That is what Western audiences are more used to. And so by those standards, the medieval period is from around 500 CE to about the 14th century. In terms of the fashion history that I'm actually covering from about 300 BCE to about 600 CE. This is considered generally to be the late Vedic period in terms of Indian fashion history. The Vedic period itself is from about 1100 BCE to about 500 BCE, and then this is the period that is referred to as that of the sutras, from about 300 to about 600. So basically this is when the sutras that are in the Vedas were written approximately, and these are all approximate because it was a very heckin' long time ago. So I won't be covering the Vedic period because unfortunately we don't have a lot of primary evidence on what was worn besides a few references from the Vedas themselves. And the references that I specifically want to start with are the ones that we get in the Upanishads and the Sutras. So these garments are named, the upper garment is named the Uttarya, which is basically like a fancy little scarf or a shawl. And the lower garment is named the Antarya. And the really cool thing is that these garments were the same for men and women. Hold the presses. Stop them fully. The coolest thing about ancient Indian fashion is that it is incredibly androgynous. It is not really differentiated by gender. What does this mean? Well, this means that we free the boobie. Because I know we're only 4 minutes into this video and I'm already dropping a crazy bit of info on you guys. Men and women in ancient India, in medieval India, all went shirtless, topless. It was not a thing. It was not required. So with that fun fact drop to hold your attention for a little bit, I'm going to jump backwards a little bit. Where did this begin for me? I, like most people in any culture, kind of assume that Indian fashion always kind of was the way it was, mostly because my mom told me that, and in retrospect, of course that's not the case. Of course the layperson, cough, my mother, doesn't really know what fashion history was like in India. Just as if I found a random person on the street here and was like, hey, what was fashion history like in the United States? They'd be like, petticoats, I think. Corsets, right? Didn't that hurt? And we know that's wrong. We know that's wrong. So I got into looking up Indian fashion history because I was reading a book. And in this book called The Tiger at Midnight, they mention a garment that is worn like a scarf or a shawl on the upper body called an uttariya. And I remember going, never heard that word before. Okay, that's confusing. I guess they're just making stuff up. They were not just making stuff up. This was the moment where I started going down this rabbit hole. And the cool thing about medieval Indian fashion is that while there is a lot of different stuff going on, it also changes very, very slowly. And the fashion in the north of India changes at a different rate than the fashion of the south of India, because the North Indians had more contact with other people than South Indians did. I am South Indian, so I will be focusing on South India because I have, you can say, a slightly vested interest in this. So before we continue, I just want to throw out a little disclaimer. I'm just learning this stuff. I am a hobbyist like all of you guys, and I do have degrees in research, and I am a research biologist by trade, so I do know how to do research and literature research. However, I am not an expert in this field. I am still learning, and I am still exploring and trying to learn everything that I can learn. So while this is going to include all the information that I know, please do be aware that I am not an expert, and I'm merely just a really, really interested person trying to do her best. But again, aren't we kind of all this? So in the words of The Sound of Music, let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. And by that, I do mean jewelry, because jewelry is actually one of the things that was worn earliest and most often. There are quite a lot of different types of jewelry going on. We have earrings, we have bracelets, we have necklaces, we have armbands, we have belts, we have anklets. We see a lot of different materials being used. And for necklaces and most jewelry, we're primarily seeing gold and precious stones being used. But one of the cool things is that there are also pearls being used, which is really interesting, and also seashells. So necklaces were usually made of gold and precious stones. One of the few interesting things is that a lot of statues of women are depicted with pendants on their necklaces, whereas the statues of the men are not shown with these pendants. There are also crowns and headdresses that people would wear. There's one like tall cylindrical shaped crown that was really popular early on with both sexes, but after some time this fell out of fashion, naturally. Earrings were very, very popular, and some of the more old shapes are like shaped like fish or like crocodile, or they're just circles. Bangles are very, very popular, very specifically bangles made out of gold or out of seashell, and these are worn by everybody. Both sexes also wore armbands, and I do say both sexes while acknowledging that there are more than two sexes, but for the sake of ancient depictions of human figures, I just said two. So there are armbands that are worn in many, many styles. As time goes on, the style evolves later to armbands only being worn on the left arm. One of the cool things that I found is that there are actually hollow anklets that were made out of gold, and then they were filled with loose pearls, and this would make them make noise as people would walk, which was really, really great. There's a bunch of different like carvings and sculptures that depict men and women both with anklets, and also a few that depict just the women. So its regional popularity makes that change. Another thing that's very specific to South India is called the Yagnopavita, which is a sacred ornament that was worn over one shoulder. It was like a long necklace. This appeared around the 2nd century, and this was very South India based. It moved to North India later, like as a bit of a fashion statement. And interestingly enough, the Yagnopavita has stayed in modern Indian culture as my dad actually wears one, except in modern Kannada, it's called a janvada. I don't actually know what it's called in other areas of South India, but my dad wears one, and so does his dad. But back in ancient times, these could be made out of very decorative material or just thread, and it was also a form of jewelry. Interestingly, women are also seen wearing this in ancient sculptures, although women don't wear these today. So next, I wanted to talk about makeup. So makeup was actually a thing. Both men and women would adorn their skin with 3 colors. This would be sandalwood paste, and then they would use kumkum, which is a red color. This red color is actually still used today as our modern bindi, so that little red dot. If you're not doing it with a sticker, the way that people would do it classically is with kumkum, which is just a red powder. And the other color that they would use was called anjanam, and this is a black pigment that would be used on the eyes. So basically your old-timey eyeliner was always there. We did it first. I actually don't know that. Don't believe that. Or maybe do. So now that we chatted for a bit about the jewelry and the makeup, let's get into what we're really interested in. Hairstyles. Fooled you there, didn't I? So there were a lot of different hairstyles that happened. Actually, one of the interesting things about fashion at this time is that both men and women would wear turbans. However, as hairstyles became more and more intricate for women, turbans sort of fell out of fashion for them. So it wasn't that women couldn't wear turbans, it was just that they didn't want to wear turbans because they'd rather do their hair fancier. Especially in North India, women started to have crowns and tiaras and all sorts of like fanciful braids. Obviously, the single braid stayed in fashion, but in some places, young girls would wear multiple braids and up to 5 braids. Another normal look was a low bun, and at some points in time, a high bun also became very popular. A very interesting thing about hairstyles that were popular is that even in the ancient times, people used to use jasmine to decorate their hair. So early medieval times is about when we start to see the emergence of the sari. This is when that lower garment that I was talking about, that's called the antarya, it grows longer and then it forms a sari type drape where it is used to also drape the upper body. But this is specifically seen in North India. In South India, the tradition continues of wearing a wrapped or draped garment about the legs. And as I mentioned before, this lower garment was referred to in the end of the Vedic era as the antarya. Some other names for this garment include, finding my list, include veshti or dhoti. I can't really say that word well, my bad. And fun fact, in South India, specifically where I'm from again, it's called the panche, and men still wear this. The actual dhoti wrap itself is the way of wrapping this fabric so you have separate legs, and this wrap is also still very popular. You can actually see a lot of men wearing it and then wearing like a salwar top on top of this or with this. Another cool thing is that women will, in modern times, wrap sari with a dhoti wrap and do the separate legs. That wrap itself is also done with pleats in the center front, and that is the dance attire for traditional Bharatanatyam dancers, which is really cool. But I'm getting distracted. I'm gonna rewind and get back on track. Ancient fashion, not current fashion. Come on, Nami, you can do this. So next, I wanted to address that upper garment. So that upper garment that I mentioned, that's called the uttariya, that is a scarf. It's a scarf, a shawl. It is another piece of fabric that is used to drape over the body, except this time the upper body. There were many different styles of wearing it, and it was worn by both men and women, but it was also rarely worn to actually just cover the breasts. It was usually worn just like over the shoulders or like draped about the arms. It's just like a, oh, look at me, fashion. But by now you probably have noticed something. Nami, none of these are sewn. They're just fabric. Where's the sewing? Didn't they sew stuff? Not really, honestly. So a lot of medieval Indian fashion was just loose and light because the temperature is so hot. It was all about draping the body with these fabrics and adorning the body with these fabrics to, both protect and enhance. It was so hot, so there really was not a need to cover up the body for the sake of warmth, which is why there was no need for more top garments, and like drapes are easy. One cool thing is that if you look at sculptures, there are very different styles that exist of these drapes. There's a bunch of different variety in where the pleats were positioned. If it was pleated, was it tucked in the front? Was it tucked in the back? Did they leave? How many pleats did you make? Did you tuck up the extra? Just like there are a bajillion, this is a technical number, of ways to wear a modern sari, there were also a bajillion ways to do these leg wraps. And you can see in sculptures many different styles that were used. Another cool lower garment was actually called the cummerbund, and it is a waistband that was tied over the garment. And once again, it was just a piece of fabric that was knotted, and the ends were left to dangle to about the knees. These could be knotted very, very elaborately with bows and swoops and all sorts of fun designs. Once again, there's lots of sculpture depicting them in many different styles, which is super cool. Another waist decoration was a belt or a girdle called mekla. These were multi-stranded waist girdles that were really popular with women, and they often had lots of chains and pearls dangling, and they could wrap fully around the legs. They could be very elaborate, they could be very basic, they could be very wide and very embellished. Just make them as shiny as possible. That was the rule. So an interesting thing about the lower garment that was worn is that in the north, this garment tended to become longer and more modest. However, in the south, this continued to stay short, and the people in South India continued to wear minimal and short clothes until about the 7th and 8th century. There is actually a monument that has panels of engravings in Mahabalipuram that show fashion from that was dated to about the 8th century, that still shows these short lower garments and bare upper chests for all genders of people. And it's really interesting because this has evolved much quicker in North India. Around this time, however, is what you guys are probably the most curious about, which is, when did the titty become unfreed? And technically in South India, not for a very long time. There was never truly a moment when it became required to cover your breasts until after the British. However, fashions of blouses slowly came into being, but this is again more in the modern times. This is 11th century and forward. from where we are in medieval times, there isn't really a popularity of an upper garment for a very, very long time for women. It is just that utaria, that shawl that isn't even worn to be covering or modest. But again, let's keep in mind, modesty is a very cultural behavior, and up until this era, there was no shame in having your chest exposed as a woman. And so this clothing at this time was fully modest by their standards. And it's only when you view it in the modern eye that people are like, what do you mean? Ladies went with their chests out? Are you crazy? There's actually quite a bit of pushback in some scholarship on this topic, in which modern scholars will like to claim that, oh, it's just an artistic depiction. Like the Greeks would carve statues naked. Like that's what they're doing here too. But the Greeks also have statues of fully clothed and intricately detailed depictions of clothing from the time. And all of the statue work, all of the artwork of women in ancient India, in medieval India, shows them uncovered 95% of the time. And it stands to reason that if this was an artistic depiction, why would these queens be depicted topless? These high-ranking ladies are depicted like this. Like, clearly this was a real method of dress and a normal method of dress, because otherwise that you wouldn't just paint everybody shirtless. Like, who let these artists do that? Like, that's not a thing. But anyway, I digress. It comes down to, once again, modern modesty standards being like, wow, that's insane. That would never. You know what? Petition for everybody to move to New York and be topless, because that's the thing that you can legally do. Not that I would be comfortable enough to do that, because people are awful, but I digress. Again, I'm getting off topic. So this is not to say, though, that there were no upper garments at all for women. There are a few examples of things. There were some very, very early apron style blouses that would just tie with like a string in the back and just like a cover of fabric in the front. These could vary in length, in modesty, in cut, and a lot of stuff. There was also, in certain areas, there was basically just like a little tie front, little bandeau top that was going on. And there were also breast bands that were just worn, a single like 1 to 1.5 inch strip of fabric that was just worn around the breasts. This could be worn just by itself. Sometimes they had straps like halter. Other times they were worn alone. Sometimes they were just really, really heavily embellished, which is really cool. But again, all of these are not required, which is the coolest thing about all of this. I could have sworn I had written some notes on some references for these. Yes. So the breast band that I was talking about, it specifically was called a stanapatta, and it was, you could see it depicted on a few statues. One from about the 10th century, a depiction of Vishnu's wife. Another one from about the 12th century, a depiction of Rukmini. And then one in the 9th century for a depiction of Durga. These were all seen in South Indian archaeological finds specifically, because that's what I was researching and looking for, South India specifically. And it was obviously shown that these were an option, but they were not required in any sense of the word. And the vast majority of people with breasts actually did not wear them. So what have we learned? Jewelry, lots of jewelry. That's the first one. I would say turbans for all, until hairstyles became more elaborate. Lots of fun belts. Lots of jewelry. I'm still on jewelry. Also, we did eyeliner first. What was that actually? I think that was actually only 3 things or 4 things, if I don't count jewelry like 5 times. The androgyny of Indian fashion, in that men and women were basically wearing the same thing for a very, very long time. And sort of the slowness with which this evolved in ancient times. People were very content to just keep wearing the same stuff until outside influences came in and fully changed their minds. A lot of the evolution of styles that you see are in specific fashions of drapes for the Antaria, specific fashions of drape for the Uttaria, types of jewelry, types of headdresses. These are the things that change more than the actual shape of the garment itself. It's not like we're fully changing the shape of the petticoats here. We're not going from like a giant cage crinoline to peignets to all of that. The changes here are a little more subtle, and it's honestly super interesting how much variety was created when all you were using was a piece of cloth. Some pretty cool stuff. And one thing that I haven't even touched on in here is the different types of fabric and the different prints and the materials. India was a place that had a lot of cotton, and so, as you know, the muslin industry, the textile industry, was stolen from India during the British Raj, and that is why Britain is now one of the biggest producers of that in the world. But India was very rich in cotton, very rich in textile arts, and that art included the weaving of fabrics and different dye techniques and different weaving techniques, and weaving cloth of gold and brocading and all of this. And I can't even start to touch on that because I am not anywhere near an expert. I know a few different types of modern differences in saris. So I know that in South India, in Karnataka, where I'm from, where my family's from, Mysore silk saris are very popular, and I know this, or rather, I now know that this isn't the case in other places because I recently went to a wedding, and everybody was like, "Oh, you guys are all wearing your silk saris. You must be from Bangalore." And I was like, "What do you mean? Is that a thing? What do you mean?" And, you know, it's just some little cool stuff like that. But one day I'll come back to you guys with more info on different types of fabric, more info on modern sari drapes. I'll come show you how to drape a dhoti, but you know, for now, I hope you guys enjoy this little tidbit. I hope you guys enjoy this word vomit sampling of what medieval Indian fashion was. And I hope you guys have had your curiosity piqued. I hope you guys want to learn more and explore more about this topic, because I certainly do, and I'm going to be making more concise, less rambly, photographical, wow, that was not correct, I'm gonna keep that in. That was just so wrong that it was funny, and I have to keep it in now. But I'm going to make shorter, more concise videos with photographical evidence and actual pictures of the archaeological finds and some of the statues that I was referencing here, so that you guys can really see what this is about. And I'll also make a whole video going into, you know, the evolution of blouses and how that became a thing for Indian women in general, and how certain groups were resistant to this, all of this, and how it actually ended up becoming popularized and accepted to the point that now Indian people, just lay people, believe that we've always worn a blouse and that it's always been there. There's also so much to talk about the evolution of other types of garments in India. I haven't even touched on a Gagra choli because that comes later, and in North India. I haven't touched on salwar kameez because that comes in with Muslim invaders when they bring their fashion. I haven't touched on the melding of British trousers and coats with Indian clothing. I haven't touched on how modern South Indian men in Karnataka will wear a punche, will wear that, and then they will wear a suit top and jewelry to modernize it. There is so much stuff to still discuss here, and I hope that you guys are curious now. And if you made it this far in the video, maybe comment "free the titties" or something like that. I don't know. Is that allowed? Is that going to get this video removed, demonetized? I don't know. Is that demonetization bait, Or is it only demonetization bait if I show actual human flesh? Oh my god, am I even allowed to show, like, these pictures of these topless statues? Like, is that... Huh. You know what? This is why I'm not including pictures in this video. It's because I would just have to censor out the top half of all these statues. And I would also feel compelled to censor out the male ones as well, because, like, equal opportunity, you know? Well, either way, this got rambly. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you guys are intrigued. I hope you guys are curious. In the meantime, please check out Mayankraj Singh's video. He is doing a video on the last 1,000 years of Indian fashion history, and he has studied this in university, and so he is like a good person to watch about this. There's also a couple other videos on YouTube that already exist about this topic. I will also link the articles and the book that I used for my primary resources on this and my secondary resources for this video. One more thing, if you guys are interested in reading an Indian fantasy YA book, check out The Tiger at Midnight by Swati Thirdala. That is the book where I first heard the mention of the word Uttariya, and that is what sparked all of this curiosity in the first place. And I guess the last thing I want to say is that if you are interested in learning more about women's clothing that was worn without a blouse in India, unfortunately, it's not specifically South Indian, ancient India clothing, but more after the sari comes into fashion, you should check out, that was not English, you should check out Natasha Thusson. She does a lot of really great videos on how to do blouseless sari drapes and also just all sorts of different sari looks in general. It's really awesome. Love her. Shout out to Erica for showing me Natasha's videos in the first place, because love this, love her. I will link everything in the comments. Wow, no, not in the comments, in the description below. If I do miss something, please leave me a comment and be like, hey Nami, where'd you find this? Where'd you find that? Where the heck was this sourced from? I will get back to you, and I will give you the info. Thank you so much for joining in for my spirited ramble, as I am calling it, and I hope you guys stick around for more succinct and less rambly Indian fashion history. And if you also did like the rambly stuff, let me know, and I will make myself another outline and give you guys a more rambly video about another specific Indian fashion history topic. All right, thank you guys for tuning in. I appreciate you guys so much. Please check out the other videos in the Routes Symposium. I will also link that down below. What will I not link? That's a good question. What will I not link? All right, thank you guys so much for your time. I hope you guys have a great day, and have a great day. I just said that twice. I talked for so long, I'm gonna drink some water.